Although I think it really doesn't include much that hasn't been said up here before, often many times. I appreciate and understand why you thought it was necessary, and it's unfortunate that you thought it was necessary to go through the exercise of making this presentation tonight. Hopefully the public can draw whatever additional comfort they think is necessary from it. I would ask the board's indulgence. I have a few follow-up comments to make. First and foremost, unfortunately, at least in my opinion, the one person who most desperately needed to hear and comprehend the substance of your presentations doesn't appear to be here and would be unlikely to pay much attention to it anyway. In the wake of our last meeting, I heard in a number of places and saw in a number of comments the term delusion bandied about. I'm fairly comfortable with its colloquial connotation, but I took a moment the other day to confirm its formal definition, and this is what I found. A delusion, according to one dictionary, is a false belief strongly held in spite of invalidating evidence. Another dictionary similarly defines the term as a fixed false belief that is resistant to reason or confrontation with actual fact. Does that sound familiar? Time and again, we've been treated to redundantly incoherent dissertations and disjointed efforts to contrive a tale of intrigue surrounding the Land and Lakes landfill, the Lake County Water Treatment Facility at Pekara, and our own water system. And although we've asked repeatedly to be provided with any factual support that exists for those claims, we've never received even a scintilla of corroborative documentation to substantiate any of those accusations. It seems proof and facts, apparently, get in the way of casting aspersions. As was recapped tonight by Mr. Bragg and Mr. Boyson, Mrs. Stone's tales of doom, despotism, despair have been rejected repeatedly. There's nothing more than sound and fury signifying nothing. Lake County, the Illinois EPA, the United States EPA have each reviewed her claims and rejected her accusations, finding them lacking in substance and devoid of merit. And yet that hasn't stopped her. And so we spent the good portion of our meeting this evening once again discussing the same issue once again. We as a board and as a community apparently will remain hostage to the inane ramblings of a half-baked crusader vainly in search of a legitimate cause, immersed in a self-created delusional campaign. She may not be here tonight, but she continues to lash out and engage in increasingly caustic and disruptive antics and spewing baseless innuendo, defamations, and unfounded hypotheses. And our staff has to spend the time and effort to refute them. We're spending taxpayer money that could be used for other purposes. And most maddeningly, in that regard, she also seems to want to play the role of hapless victim, portraying herself as a dauntless crusader whose noble cause has been thwarted, not by ineptitude or lack of substance, but by malicious conspiracies of evil contrarians. It's utter nonsense. And I'm compelled to add, Mr. President, that there appears to be a somewhat more insidious scheme at work. Mrs. Stone was kind enough to admit to the Pioneer Press recently what could only be assumed beforehand. She acknowledged that her recent antics, which she likes to cloak as civic advocacy, are little more than attempts to obtain retribution against those whom she blames for her own failures and ultimate removal as a member of this board. And that particularly includes the orchestrated personal attacks on the village president, which we've witnessed at the last few meetings. That's what this is really about. It's what it has been about. And it will not end with just us up here on the dais. And on that point, I must digress for just a moment. I'm reminded of an old adage often attributed to Mark Twain or Oscar Wilde, and I've often tried to follow it as much as possible. And that is, one should not pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel. And what they're referring to is the press. Now today, some of you in the press don't buy ink anymore. So I guess maybe that's enough of a rationalization to disregard that sage advice. Either way, I want to speak directly to the members of the media who are here with us tonight, and more particularly those of you who were here 3 weeks ago. And this is what I have to say. Shame on you. 3 weeks ago in this room, your profession was attacked. A member of the media present to engage in his profession was aggressively threatened, assailed, and provoked. Why did it occur? Solely because he's a member of the press who dared to publish blog columns in which he expressed opinions critical of Mrs. Stone on these very issues. Mr. Zoller, who incidentally isn't here this evening, but only because he's out of town on a previously scheduled professional conference, was here to cover our meeting. He didn't seek out Mrs. Stone. He did not attempt to engage with her. No, she sought him out. She threatened him. She impugned his professionalism and directed an obscenity at him. Now, did he overreact? Those of us in the room might say so. Some may not. I won't condone or make excuses for loss of temper. It's not my place to do so in any event. But by reacting to her provocations, he provided her with an opportunity to lead you, the members of the media, like obsequious lemmings, to parrot precisely the storyline she wanted. Poor little Lisa, the hapless victim. And you fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. Worse yet, in doing so, you ignored or simply failed to understand the true story of what was happening that evening. An overt personal attack on a member of the media intended to silence critical press. Evita Perón would be proud. You should be ashamed. Apparently intoxicated by the siren sound of contrived controversy that you hope will drive people to purchase your newspapers or click on your websites, you've discarded any pretext of objectivity or journalistic ethics. And you folks wonder why your profession and the news business generally is headed the way of the dinosaurs. You each were attacked that night by proxy, and you rolled over like dogs. Your job is to expose, not to run away. Because you see, when exposed to the light of day, the theatrical illusion that Mrs. Stone wishes to foster cannot long endure. As we witnessed during her brief tenure on this board, a revelation is inevitable. Irreversibly oblivious, unprepared, and unqualified, the vessel was exposed as empty, the pot shown to be cracked, the emperor revealed to have no new clothes. And now the circus has returned. Week in and week out, Mrs. Stone seeks her proverbial pound of flesh from her purported detractors, those sitting up here on the dais and those of you holding a pad in the audience. And although she would prefer to ignore actual fact, the kind of facts that we heard from Mr. Boyson and Mr. Bragg this evening, and instead rely on revisionist history and unsupported claims, she cannot obscure a simple truth. Unfit to the end, she failed as an elected official. And the voters of this community responded in commendable fashion. They fired her. Yeah, the voters embraced an extraordinary citizens' initiative and voted her overwhelmingly out of office. She thus became the first public official in the often ignominious history of the state of Illinois to be removed from office by a voter initiative. Now, Mrs. Stone can stand here and rail and rage against all she wishes against those she deems to blame for her own failures and this very special distinction that she's earned. She certainly has targeted the village president and other members of this village board and certain members of the media as well. And as we now know, the contrived water issues are mere pretext for her attempted revenge. The place she needs most desperately to look is the mirror. The fault was hers alone. The failure was hers alone. The choice was made by the voters, more than 10,000 of whom participated. Those are facts. Only one person can't seem to acknowledge them. So let me be really clear, Mr. Bragg, Mr. President, it is not the role or responsibility of this board to enable or even endure delusional flights of fancy or personal attacks on the members of this staff and the members of this village board. Personally, I've heard enough narcissistic ramblings, self-righteous accusations cloaked in the disingenuous guise of civic advocacy. Mr. Bragg, this evening you have provided a clear response to the water issue contrivances, showing us once again in clear and concise manner that one, there is no substance to these claims, and two, the purported claims do not in any event actually involve the village of Buffalo Grove. They may have something to do with the county of Lake or some state or federal agency, but they have nothing to do with this village. If Mrs. Stone possesses any new information or her purported consortium that she purports would substantiate her claims or relate them actually to this village and somehow make them village business, Now's the time for her to share it. She should simply give staff copies of whatever documentation she has, beyond that already rejected by the County of Lake, the IEPA, and the US EPA, that she contends would establish the merits of her allegations. Mr. President, in that regard, there is no need for additional presentations, contrived meetings, roundtables, or other publicity stunts. Mr. Bragg, there's no reason for staff to spend more time and effort and taxpayer money to respond to these groundless accusations. I certainly have no intention of directing you, Mr. Bragg, or your staff to devote additional time and taxpayer expense to facilitate any more of the nonsense. And I hope the rest of the board concurs with that assessment. And unless and until she comes forward with something beyond which has already been rejected that somehow substantiates some claim, with all due respect, it's high time for her to comply with the will of the voters. And most importantly, Mr. President, it's time for us as a board to return to conducting the actual business of this village. And I hope we've heard the last of it. I doubt we have, but I believe we should hear the last of it right here, right now, tonight. Thank you.